Honestly, man, I got nothing left on earth. So my first restoration-related project that I owned on my own and finished was that Triumph-powered Devon, old sports racer, the red and yellow one from a story. And the restoration had largely been done, but the guy stalled and then sold it, and I finished it and raced it. And then I sold the car. A car that I thought was just so beautiful was the Lotus 11 Le Mans, back from the mid-1950s. They made hardly any of these things. I mean, coach-built, aluminum bodywork. I mean, that's in the era of like Ferrari 250 Testarossas and Jaguar D-types and stuff. That was just as an iconic of a car. But the Lotus was much less money before they were starting to go up, and I was just like, wow, I mean, that is beautiful. I wish I could have one of these things. And I remember I just sold the Devon, and in Hemmings, the old thick magazine, there was a little ad that said like Lotus 11 Le Mans and unfinished restoration, and a price that was like, made me go, I think I might. And I called the man, and he was very nice older man, right, about it. And I was talking to him about the, you know, where it was, the state it was in. It was unfinished. He started to restore it. Somebody else had it. The other thing that helped get the price somewhere where I might be able to afford it, other than the car being nowhere near complete, was that it had a history, but the chassis tag was gone. Like they gave it its serial number. Not having the tag helped me be able to afford something. And the fact that it was an unfinished car. I just sold that car, and I used the money from it to buy my C4 black Corvette that later got wrecked in front of the police station. And then all the money I had in the world for this, I called the guy, I'm like, this sounds really neat. But I gotta be honest with you. I love this car. I think I can do the restoration. I adore it, but I'm gonna be straight with you. This is all the money I have in the world, which is like, I think about 20% less than he was asking, which is a pretty good knockdown. Usually you can get 10% off. 20 is generally a pretty good amount to knock somebody down. And he's like, ooh, that's right on the red line. He's like, can you do? I'm like, honestly, man, I got nothing left on earth to be able to, you know what I mean? He's like, all right, well, and he thought about it. He's like, come on out, we'll talk and think. And I brought, you know, a bank draft check, man, that's the name in case he did. He's just such a nice older man, right? He was kind of like a mentor for me for that time. He ended up being I think an English teacher at a university in Virginia, and he had a farmhouse that he fixed up himself. But the amazing thing was, he had a barn full of unbelievable cars. It was like that commercial in the 90s where the kid's chasing a baseball and like falls down a hole, and there's this Japanese guy with this Nissan collection of all the best cars, a 350Z. It was kind of like that. I mean, he had a Lola T70 Can-Am car. He had a Lamborghini Miura. He had another Lotus 11. He had a pre-war Alpha 8C in there. He had like an AC Ace Bristol. I mean, pretty zoomy cars. And this is a while ago before things really started going up. But that guy, I always thought he was so cool because he was the most legit car guy in the right way. Like he had the love for it. He worked on all these things himself. And I remember looking at it, and there it was, and the body like barely fit, and the nose was new, and the tail was old, and I'm like, I've never done panel beating before. And I started getting that feeling in my gut, like, I love this car, I want to do it, but I don't think I can do this project. I don't think I got enough talent or tools or anything. I started kind of being quiet. I kind of felt sad about it. And he was being really nice to me, and I told him, I go, I gotta tell you what, I don't know if I can do this. And he goes, yes, you can. He's like, come with me. And we go in his little workshop, old cottage, and he's got a little English wheel that you like stick in a vise. He's like, I'm gonna show you how to coach build right now. And he gives me some stuff, and he shows that we're hammering this and using a torch and using the English wheel. I go, I can do this, all right. And he's showing me I'm feeling better, and we're talking about it, and you know, the mechanics and stuff are not so bad. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this. He goes, I tell you what, I'm gonna go in the house, I gotta make dinner with my wife. You hang out in the barn with the cars, just look at the car, see what you think, you feel whatever. I just kind of hung out there. It was such a cool barn, all these cars, old cars, and this Lotus 11 Le Mans, I start looking at it in my mind. I'm starting to fix it up. You know what I mean? Maybe it was the perfect sales technique, but he was the nicest guy ever. And I was just young in my career, and I kind of felt good. I'm like, I can do this. This is just metal. I remember walking in quietly to his house, and they made dinner, got dinner, and they were letting me stay over. They were so nice to me. And I told him, I said, you know, I want to do it. I think I can do it. And if you're still game, he's like, well, I thought you'd feel that way. It was kind of a really neat gift that man gave me in a way as a young person, a young craftsman. I didn't necessarily have a mentor or teacher to do that, but he just gave me just enough to empower me. Like I was there, I went to the effort, and now I'm loading up this Lotus 11 that can barely hold itself on an open trailer that I borrowed to get it, bungee tying everything down. And I have this thing on a trailer that kind of looks like a speed racer car with old beat up aluminum. Got it home, and I actually put it in my parents' garage, and I would work on it there late at night, as you do. You start and get it ready. The body was so beat up. So I'm there with a little dolly and a hammer trying to smooth it out as much as possible. And I didn't have a welder at that time, so I'm using like a little brazing kit from Ace Hardware. You know, you get a propane or a MAP gas thing and an oxygen. So I'm going through little oxygen canisters like crazy with this stupid little torch. And I'm making throttle linkages, and I'm having to make everything. And I didn't even own a drill at that time in my life. So I bought a nice Milwaukee drill because it just rivets out the yin-yang on the Lotus. And darned if I didn't do a really good job restoring it. All the Lotuses at the time back then, people would put Weber carburetors on, and they would have fuel cells, and they would have modern wiring harness and modern gauges and giant roll bars and stuff on. I go, wait a minute. This is an early one. It still has the smaller 1100 engine. It has SU carburetors on it. It has the handbrake, like for road laws. It's got a cloth braided wiring harness that was remade. I'm gonna restore this thing like it was new. I'm not even putting a roll bar or fuel cell in it, which sounds crazy. Maybe it is. But there were still some sanctioning bodies at the time that would actually let you race a car that is actually perfectly period. I had to be so rudimentary because there were some pieces that just didn't exist. So I had a panel that didn't really fit to fare over the passenger compartment. It was right-hand drive. And the Lotus 11 Le Mans had this beautiful head fairing, kind of like an old 1930s racing plane. And it would have just a single opening like this and a door that would open. And I think I maybe had a skin of a door. I had to make all that stuff, make the door out of aluminum, riveting it together. And that was just a simple curve. But then I had to get to where I had to make some compound curves. You know what I mean? And it was hard because the part that goes over the front of the cockpit has to have the windscreen, has to be strong, and then you have a thing that fit in. I think I had to have like a shoulder bulge where it, maybe it wasn't a shoulder bulge, but where the door comes over and the windscreen is, it goes to the head fairing and the fender. It has to have a bulge. So I ended up getting dirt and sand outside, and like I found old piece of an awning, and I put it in there and wrapped it tight. Like I had to make all this stuff. I couldn't even afford it. And an old ball peen hammer, I was heating it up, and I remember out like in the dirt with a piece of aluminum, hammering it to make my compound curve. And then I walked back down to the garage with this little English wheel I borrowed from the guy because he let me borrow it. I'm making it right. And that's how I did it. That's how I formed these things. I mean, I was practically using fingernails and like rocks. It was just that rudimentary, but it was a willer's away, and it was ingenuity. And I spent months doing it. It's such a pretty car. It was such a dream, right? But nothing was right of this. I remember when I finally got it to start off, I was all excited. And then there was a little plug that's supposed to be in the end of the camshaft. I'm like, I have no oil pressure, like 2 PSI. Oh no, shut it down. What's going on? Had the cam cover off, looked at it. I saw oils just pouring out the back of the camshaft. So I had to make a plug out of a bolt and and Loctite it in and everything. So it was just a neat experience, and it was somewhat humorous because you stay up real late at night restoring a car by yourself in the wee hours, you know? I rooted TV there, cable TV at the time, and I always knew it was time to stop working and going to bed when the Golden Girls came on. No knock on the Golden Girls, but at that time, that was definitely something played at the wrong hour at night. You should probably go get some sleep. So I'd be watching that. Finally got it done. I think I trailered it out to the country. There's a pole barn out there, and painting it. So, smoothing it and priming it and painting it and wet sand, taking forever. And it was such a pretty car. I mean, it was just the most pure, beautiful art form of any car. I mean, honestly, a Lotus 11 Le Mans, the way it was originally designed by an artist, if you forget about money and history and all that, is arguably prettier than a 250 GTO. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And I was just like on cloud 9 to bring this thing and do the art and overcome and learn techniques. And it was a great car. I even had the old spare wire wheel in it with the bungee cords to hold it down, like everything. It was so cool. I would test it in the countryside, just sailing along, like I think it was the beginning of the second part to the movie Grand Prix, when he's coming back from the accident and he gets in his brother's old Van Wall race car, something like this, and they push him and he goes and tests it on the English countryside. And it felt like that. It was a way to live beyond your years. I mentioned my Lotus. The reason I was able to afford it back when was, one, it had questionable history. Like they didn't know exactly what chassis number it was. So that hurts the value. And it was by no means restored. And generally speaking, well-heeled buyers don't like buying projects. They either want a barn find to where they get a feel good and restore it, or they want something that's done and pretty and works. There's not much in between for them. This car I was able to just afford, and it was a great thing. But the story was, and if I'm remembering this correctly, in the early 90s, when there was an initial kind of bubble or spike in values of cars, because like fax machines and things like that back in the day, the car had been, and the parts had been repossessed by the IRS from Japanese investors, something like this story, which is absurd. And it's the 90s, and how do you track that down? And how do you get a number? As with any super niche racing car from history that relates to a bigger company and has a pedigree, there are historians on it. And I can't remember his name at the moment, but a gentleman who was one of the top early Lotus historians and Lotus 11s, he heard about it. He was all excited and interesting because that was kind of like, it was a mystery back then. Like, what car was it? And he knew that based upon how it was built, it had to fit within a very small window of production of when it was done. The other cars were all accounted for, and he knew exactly where they were. And he's like, Casey, this absolutely has to be that number car, and I'm willing to vouch for it. And at that moment, as a young person, an entrepreneur, and somebody that understands the value of investment, I was like, yes! Because, you build a car and then you want to move on and have another adventure, hopefully end up on the positive or at least trade up. And my worry was that even though the car was restored period correct and it was perfect and it was a real car with real parts, the problem with not having that number, you'll get beat up by the buyers. It won't command that. So it was really fortunate that the historian did, and we knew what it was and could pinpoint it, because then it allowed me to go on and have another great adventure. But it is a lesson, VINwiki is a great tool, the app, for learning all the details of cars and actual rarity and figuring out their history. But back in the day, it was a lot harder. So there was opportunities to be both excited and disappointed. Fortunately, in this circumstance, I was excited.
Whether you're packing for a cannonball or just going about your day, it's important to just carry what you actually need. The Ridge has a line of wallets and bags that help you to do just that. Leave the junk at home and just make sure that you've always got exactly what you need with you. So be sure to check out ridge.com/VINwiki and use the code VINwiki at checkout for a discount to let them know how much you appreciate their support of the VINwiki channel.